Hey everybody, back with you on Jersey First TV and the Nader Narrative. Happy to have all of you here. This is a third on a series regarding what's going on in DC with 1099 or independent contractors or the gig economy, however you want to address it. And many of you now have been writing in and sending me emails and reaching out to say, wait a minute, I didn't know about this and this actually affects me. It does. It probably affects you directly if you are what we call a freelancer or a 1099 worker. Maybe you own your own company. Maybe you hire freelancers. This affects you. And ultimately, as a consumer in our economy, trust me, it's going to affect you at some point. What is going on? Well, an unelected body in DC, Department of Labor, has put forth a rule to severely tighten the ability of anyone to act as a 1099 independent contractor. This has such incredible implications across the economy, especially for women, and we'll talk about why that is, and definitely for small businesses. So let's get into it. I am really honored today to bring on to our program here two people who know this well and are going to share with you some insights. Kim Kavin and Wilson Freeman. You guys, thank you for being on the show. Kim, we're going to start with you. And you formed this incredible group called Fight for Freelancers, which we've actually titled the show here. And this is in New Jersey. You're in New Jersey. And what a lot of people don't know is we actually faced this as a state, potentially a state bill passing in New Jersey, and you fought to protect it. So Kim, give us some background on how this became a huge advocacy push for you.
Yes. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for exposing what's going on with your platform. We're so grateful. The way this happened to me, I have been a freelance writer and editor for 20 years by choice. I spent about 10 years as a staff writer and editor in newspapers and magazines. I just prefer freelancing. I'm happier. I make more money. It just works better for me. And about 5 years ago, California enacted a law called Assembly Bill 5 that ruined the business relationships of a lot of freelance writers and editors with their publishers, their various magazines and newspapers that they've been writing for. And so when that happened, our professional organization lit up with a warning, this is happening in California, learn about this. And at the time, I'll tell you, I kind of sat out here in New Jersey and thought, what are those crazy Californians doing now? I'm glad I don't live there. But then within a matter of, it was right on the heels of it, within weeks, New Jersey's lawmakers introduced a copycat bill. So did New York's, but New Jersey went first. And it was at the end of 2019 and into early 2020 where we had to basically give ourselves a crash course in labor and employment law, figure out what this was, figure out how to fight it. And some fellow freelance writers and I created this grassroots, nonpartisan group called Fight for Freelancers. We ended up testifying at the State House. We packed that State House. We made those lawmakers sit there for more than 4 hours listening to the damage they were going to cause. Yeah. We wrote op-eds. We went on television. We were on the radio. Everywhere that we could get our voices heard, we did. And we ended up killing that bill, which was the correct thing to do. But then literally the next day, Congress in Washington, D.C. started announcing they were going to move a federal bill that had this same freelance busting language in it. And so we had to then take Fight for Freelancers nationwide. It now has thousands of members. And I testified before Congress last year trying to explain why this freelance busting is wrong and it must stop. And now we are the four co-founders of Fight for Freelancers are all now plaintiffs with our good friend Wilson Freeman here at Pacific Legal. We have now sued the United States Labor Department, which has praised this regulatory language and is now, well, Wilson can explain to you what they're trying to do, but it is all related to this same government effort to try to have fewer independent contractors in the workforce and more employees, whether we like it or not. And we think that is wrong, and we are trying to stop it.
Absolutely. And this has turned into a big legal fight. And Wilson, we're going to get to you here in just a minute. But I want to put in context some of the things you said, Kim. First of all, thank you for fighting because you're fighting for 1099 gig workers. You're also fighting for small businesses who use these individuals to grow their businesses. So, the context with California, they passed this AB 5. It destroyed small businesses. Many closed when they realized, we cannot, yoga studios and wedding photographers and a lot of publishers, they had to get a carve out, whatever. But the reality was it was a disaster. And I believe a 10% drop in small businesses and employment in those areas in California. And many people fled the state. They fled the state and now they're facing this on a national level. So rather, obviously, New Jersey couldn't pass it because of your work, which we appreciate. And note to everyone, it is worth doing advocacy work because you can make a difference. So it ended up, Kim, in an unelected body in the Department of Labor in DC, who happens to be led by somebody inspired by and involved in what happened in California. Now, did she learn from the destruction to small businesses in California? No. In fact, they sought to replicate this ABC test, which we're going to get into. So Wilson, I want to go to you for a second because, often we find ourselves in this fight, and especially in the last 4 years, we got to go with a legal avenue. It's sort of our last ditch effort. It's such an important effort. And as long as we have judges who aren't advocates themselves, you hope that you can be heard fairly. Pacific Legal Foundation, you guys do amazing things and you do it for free to help people fight for their constitutional rights. What about this is a constitutional fight?
Well, I think what you need to understand is this is the Department of Labor's second attempt here, because their first one was struck down in court once already. So you mentioned it's an unelected body. The Department of Labor has the power to interpret federal law, and the federal wage and hour law is called the Fair Labor Standards Act. And the department has the power to kind of say or read the law and try to say who's an employer and who's an employee and who's an independent contractor. This has huge impacts. Now, we talked a moment ago about New Jersey law. I mean, that's completely separate. California law, that's completely separate. You talked at the beginning about 1099, that's tax law. That's completely separate. The Department of Labor, completely independent of those, has this rule, which they've now put out, to attempt to limit the scope of who can be classified as an independent contractor under that law. As I mentioned, it's their second attempt. Their first one was struck down by a court in Texas back in 2021, I think. And then they started this whole new rulemaking process to create a new law, or a new rule, which they believe will, or they hope anyway, will overcome the challenges that they faced before. In our view, of course, it doesn't. It is subject to a lot of the same problems that the first rule was subject to. Their first attempted to withdraw the original rule that was in place on this standard. So, we brought a lawsuit in Georgia with Kim as one of the plaintiffs and several other members of her erstwhile team. And we have challenged the Department of Labor's rulemaking here on a number of grounds. The biggest ground we think is that it's arbitrary and capricious. The Department of Labor, when they make a rule interpreting a statute, they have to do it in a reasoned way. They can't just say whatever they want. If they're going to change from what the standard was before, they have to explain why they're changing. They have to have good reasons for what they're doing, and they have to give those good reasons to the public. That's the law. They've not done, in our view, any of that here. Plus, the rule that they've come up with is so vague and ambiguous.
Yes.
It doesn't give independent contractors like Kim guidance so they can know how they can set up their affairs so that they'll be classified as independent.
Right.
Instead, it forces them into this extremely vague balancing test, providing them with no, safe harbors they can use to protect themselves, and puts their clients at serious risk of enormous legal liability.
That's right.
So, we think that for those reasons, the rule is unlawful, and we've asked the court to set it aside here.
Yeah. Well, and there are other lawsuits too. I know the truckers have brought some lawsuits, right. And we hope that those will actually be successful. Yours may be successful, Wilson. There's no injunction. So the rule that went into effect March 11th is in effect now, unless any of these lawsuits ask for a stay maybe in the future. But I want to, you mentioned, Wilson, like how much this is guidance is not there, and it affects the worker, the independent contractor, but also the small business, because there are 6 steps now, 6 rules, if you will, or 6 qualifications plus a 7th one. And I'm a small business owner and I'm reading this. The 7th one is like a catch-all.
Yeah.
At this point, I almost find it funny because it's not funny, but the way they describe this, of course I'm going to hire somebody who does what I do as a small business because that's what I need. I'm starting my company. Why does it matter to those of you listening? Maybe I can't afford payroll yet. Maybe I can't afford to have a full-time person. Maybe I don't put myself in a position until my revenue grows where I can carry all of that with all the benefits. So the way now it's defined before this rule went in place was pretty simple and pretty easy, the Trump rule. But now, Wilson, it's like 6 rules plus a 7th. How do you navigate that?
Well, what you need to understand, if you're in business for yourself, if you're an independent contractor, I mean, the Department of Labor is going to tell you that, well, you're not subject to this rule because the rule governs employers. The Fair Labor Standards Act, by its very nature, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a wage and hour statute. So it's employers who are the ones who are the department's target. That's how the department is seeking to, as Kim said at the beginning, restrict independent contractors. Because, of course, if they restrict the businesses that work with independent contractors with legal action, then there will be fewer independent contractors, even if independent contractors aren't themselves going to be subject to enforcement actions by the Department of Labor. So how does this thing work? Well, you mentioned it. There's 6, 7 factors. It's a balancing test, which means no one can really tell you how it works ahead of time. When you look at the way you're doing business, you're engaged, you're a freelancer, you work from home, you have your own computer, you set your own hours, but the company also tells you what projects they want you to work on. You're working in the same line of business as the company.
Right.
All of those factors, the Department of Labor says, well, we're going to put all those factors in a pot. We're going to stir it up, and then, whatever comes out will tell us whether you're an employer or whether you're an employee or an independent contractor. But that's just not helpful for people. I mean, that doesn't tell the millions, tens of millions of independent contractors in this country and the companies that want to hire them, what does it take to protect myself from federal Department of Labor liability, right? From the department coming in here after the fact and saying, well, I'm sorry, but we stirred up this pot and it came out the wrong way. And as a result, you owe huge penalties.
Oh,
There's
huge
nothing
penalties.
to prevent the Department of Labor from doing that. So what's important here, I think, for if you are a freelancer to understand is that this is not the kind of hard break from the ability to do an independent contractor relationship that it was in under 85, or it would have been if New York had passed, or if New Jersey rather had passed their 85 clone. Right there, it was sort of like before the law you were an independent contractor. After the law, you can't be an independent contractor anymore. So here it doesn't quite work like that because it's a balancing test. It's going to be a gradual tightening of the screws on businesses that work with independent contractors. The department has now put out a rule which gives it this flexibility and this power to bring enforcement actions that it previously didn't have. And then it's going to use that to tighten the screws on ICs and to restrict the number of ICs in the economy generally. And I think that's going to have a lot of negative impacts, even if it's not going to be a sort of overnight change in
like California.
the way that this works for people. So, if you're an independent contractor, I think you got to look at the way you're doing business. You've got to think about, you got to maybe think about this balancing test and talk to your customers and make sure that, they're okay with you continuing to work independently. Because ultimately they're the ones who are going to be sort of holding the bag for the Department of Labor. And the Department of Labor they're trying to, they put out some guidance on their website to basically try to distance themselves from the harm that they're inflicting on independent contractors. But the way I see that sort of guidance, it's a pure PR move. I mean, ultimately they haven't changed the rule. The rule is going to have these effects. It, on its face, constricts employers' ability to use independent contractors.
Correct.
And I mean, I think ultimately for the Department of Labor, no matter how much they want to distance themselves from the impacts that's going to have on ordinary freelancers, and they want to pretend that this is just about going after the Ubers of the world. It's
No.
not. I mean, I
Well,
think
Wilson,
ultimately it's not.
this presumes there was some major misclassification problem, that it's just this awful thing that's happening out there. And I don't think they can prove that there was a need for that. But, Wilson, you bring up so many good points. And Kim, this is directed at small businesses or businesses, right? And mostly small businesses, let's be honest. But ultimately, it affects you. So when we look at the backbone of the American economy, the backbone of the American economy is small business. It is the most creative and vibrant part of our economy and employs the most people. But small businesses start in their garages often. I mean, even growing up to Amazon, they started in their garage, right? How do you start a small business, or how do you maintain one that really you want to keep small? Often by using freelancers. It's necessary in the startup phase. But the other side of it, Kim, is you build a life that you choose as an American in this economy. You decide how you want to earn your dollars, and maybe you don't want to work as a W-2 worker for any number of reasons. And what we love about this country is the freedom to make the choices like that. Those choices will disappear if companies feel that they're going to get these massive fines. They don't understand it. They're confused, and it's going to have a chilling effect. And then, Kim, what are your options?
It's exactly what I testified before Congress last year, is that we have had the right in this country since the day this nation was founded to hang out a shingle and go into business for ourselves. Right. We have that right. This freelance busting push of these past few years is trying to restrict that right. And it is not theoretical. It happened in California.
Right.
I was just on Capitol Hill 2 days ago. I got up on the 4:30 in the morning, took the train down there from Metro Park to go and talk to lawmakers who are trying now to use the Congressional Review Act to overturn this U.S. Labor Department rule for these very reasons. So many people understand that this is just fundamentally wrong. Literally, there was a congressional aide 2 days ago who looked at me after understanding what I was talking about and said, "This just sounds un-American."
Yes.
It is impossible to defend taking away somebody's right to choose self-employment, especially when it affects so many women, people of color, people who are older, who face ageism in the workforce. A lot of the most recent studies show it's about half and half, women and men, who are choosing to become independent contractors. If you look at the data from right around the pandemic and women over 40, the AARP looked at women over 40 who hung out a shingle and went into business for themselves during the pandemic. More than 95% said it was the right choice.
Yeah.
This is not a question mark, that the vast majority, even the federal government's own data, going back years, says anywhere from 70 to 85% of independent contractors are happy with our situation.
Right.
This is wrong. It's just wrong on every possible level. I'm so grateful to Pacific Legal and Wilson Freeman in particular for trying to help us stop this. I'm grateful to the lawmakers who are working on the Congressional Review Act to try and stop it. It is upsetting to me that so many of New Jersey's lawmakers keep voting for these policies. I'm personally grateful to my congressman here in the 7th District, Tom Kean Jr., who signed on as a initial sponsor of this Congressional Review Act resolution to try and stop this. I'm so grateful for him, because he is making it possible for me to go into a voting booth and keep my career. You shouldn't have to
Incredible.
losing your career when you walk into a voting booth. That's ridiculous. It's outrageous.
It's outrageous. And it's not theoretical, Kim. Like you said, we already know this has been tested in California. We already know what happened. We have so many stories, and you know these people, Kim. I've met them. They fled the state. They lost their opportunities. And Kim, the thing that I love how you say, you paint that picture of flexibility, and it can be any time in life, but more often than not, it's middle age for women who may leave the workforce, on that payroll workforce, right, and decide to put together their own lifestyle, however that looks. Maybe they have kids they need to be with, maybe they have ailing parents they need to take care of, and they want to be flexible. And I know that you understand this. I think sometimes we work more. We work in the middle of the night if we have to. We work when we have to, but it's never occurred to most of us until this recent fight that the government could come in and say, no, you are not allowed to build the life that you want, to work how you want. And really now, Kim, if those companies are not created, if the entrepreneurs don't step out and say, I'm going to take a chance and create this company, I'm going to do it using 1099 workers because I can do that. If they don't do that, we start to change as a nation, don't we? I mean, it has an incredible impact.
And the amount of people that this affects is startling. Depending on whose data you want to believe, there's as many as 70 million Americans working in more than 600 different professions that this affects. And it's so wide ranging, it's impossible to wrap your brain around. I'm a freelance writer and editor. We've seen it with translators and interpreters, graphic designers, attorneys, accountants, owner-operator truckers, lifeguards, cowboys, veterinarians. It's a startling breadth of people who don't know each other, are not an organized group of individuals, and that's what makes it so easy to attack us. Is we're so diffuse that the people who want to cause us this harm can make us a very easy target. And it's why it's so important that we all raise up our voices, call our lawmakers, and tell them to stop. Tell them that this is freelance busting and it's wrong. We have the right to choose self-employment in this country, and that right needs to be preserved and protected.
Amen. That's absolutely true. And it's amazing in the past few years, the things that we have to fight for. Did it ever occur to you, some of the things that we have had to fight for is really almost beyond believing? Wilson, I want you to give us some hope here. Kim did mention one step everybody can take, which is to let their Congress representative know they want them to sign on to the Congressional Review Act, which is Congress's tool to stop a regulatory body from overreaching. And in this case, that's what we're looking for. But, Wilson, the lawsuit, other people's lawsuits, you guys have dealt with a lot of constitutional issues in these past few years. I'm sure you've been busy. Give us some hope. Give us some, sense of where you think this might go.
Well, so as I mentioned, the impact of this rule is going to be gradual. It's going to take place over time. We have our lawsuit, which is pending. There are at least 3 other lawsuits that I know of pending in different jurisdictions around the country, including a continuation of that Texas suit, which set aside the previous rulemaking back in 2021.
Yeah.
So I'm optimistic that some court somewhere will ultimately set this rule aside. The litigation process here, we've got an accelerated briefing schedule. We hope that we can get a decision on this in the next few months, setting this rule aside, either in our case or in one of the many other cases that have been brought challenging it. But that doesn't mean we can rest on our laurels. I mean,
No.
I think it's important to not only talk about things like the Congressional Review Act, but just be aware this is just another front in the department in a war that's being conducted on freelance work and the right to earn a living around the country.
That's right. It's a war on our way of life, Wilson. It's a war on who we are as Americans. It's a war on our economy and what makes us unusual and sets us apart. And it's a war on individual freedoms. Now, let me ask you this. This is a political question, but if the November election changes power to the other party, is there a chance this whole thing goes away?
Yes. I mean, I think I think there's a few different issues where there's a yo-yo, right? Where if it's a Republican, it goes one way. If there's a Democrat, it goes the other way.
Yeah.
And when it comes to actions that come out of a federal agency like the Department of Labor, I mean, this is going to be, I think, the purest example of a yo-yo. So you're going to see it go one way during Republican administrations, and then it'll go the other way during Democratic administrations. The only way that it'll be different is if a court, in our case or a different case, sort of sets out, which is what we're asking for, the court to kind of set out a more clear understanding of what the law means. So just depending on who the president is, I mean, the department shouldn't be yo-yoing from one interpretation to another. We want a court just to tell everybody, what does the statute mean? It's really not for the department to kind of vacillate between these massively different interpretations.
Agreed. And that's why, Wilson, what you're doing is so important, because it's precedence. So we can't just rely on elections. I mean, maybe that will help, but precedence is everything. And I think you're even seeing some of these COVID lawsuits that have still, even though a lot of the mandates are gone or whatever, we need precedence in the courts. We need to be able to say, this is unconstitutional, or this is an incorrect, interpretation, whatever. If we don't have that precedence, then we are at the whim
or
of
Congress.
elections.
I mean, if Congress acts, in the form of a CRA or whatever, I think that would be very good too.
Yes.
I mean, that's the sort of thing which could settle it. Not to say that the election is sure to change
Sure.
things here, because I mean, here the Department of Labor is expressly reversing what the Trump administration did
Correct.
in 2020 and 2021. So
Right.
the election is sure to have this rule set aside, but
Yeah.
the war will continue. I mean, it'll continue in states like New Jersey, and it'll continue in D.C. in the House of Congress, and then ultimately, the presidential election will turn it again. So I agree. I mean, the only way to settle the question is Congress to weigh in, or a court to. I mean, but even if a court weighs in, it's just going to settle this little issue involving the Department of Labor. You're still going to have things like AB 5 come up, or things like the New Jersey law come up. So it's important that you also work to change people's minds. I mean, I think people need to understand that this is not, freelancing is not just something which is about Uber drivers or DoorDash drivers, because that's what people think. I mean, they really think this is about the gig economy. But Kim is not a gig economy worker. I mean, she is a small business.
Correct.
And she just happens to have one employee. Yep. And that's the sort of thing that I mean, I think, as you said, it's part of our way of life. It's essential to the American dream that people be able to do this without worrying that, that they're going to run afoul of one federal law or one state law here or there.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we also can't afford the lawyers to interpret it all for us because we're small businesses. So it's just layers and layers of offense, frankly. But we do have to stay vigilant. And, Wilson, I want to say again, we appreciate you guys, everything that you do. Freedom is fought for, and we've got to hold on to it. So no more sleeping at the wheel for any of us. Kim, I'm going to give you the last word just to kind of inspire everybody to understand that no matter who they are, in some way this affects them.
Yeah. And what I would add I agree with everything Wilson said, of course, and everything you've said. What I would add is, while this may be a partisan issue among lawmakers, it is not a partisan issue among independent contractors.
Amen.
I can't tell you how many liberals have stood up and raised their voices to fight this. People who are liberals, people who are Democrats, people who are progressives, they also want to hang out a shingle and go into business for themselves. It is our position at Fight for Freelancers USA that this should not be a partisan issue. It is offensive to us. Our members have voted for everybody from Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump. We are united. This is an area where the American people are united, that we want the right to choose self-employment protected. So again, while I'm super grateful for all the attorneys who are helping to try to block this, I encourage people, especially in New Jersey right now, call your members of Congress, call your senators, tell them to support the use of the Congressional Review Act to overturn this Department of Labor rule. It's happening right now. This is the time to call. Please take 30 seconds, pick up the phone, show up at a town hall, raise your hand and raise your voice. I didn't even know who all my elected officials were when this mess started. It's not hard to raise your voice and say, I want the right to choose self-employment protected. Go out and do it. Join us.
I love it. I love it. Your website?
Our website is fightforfreelancersusa.com. People can find us also on Twitter, on Facebook. And if they want to follow me personally, I am at the Kim Kavin.
I love it. I love it. Thank you to you both, Wilson, Kim. We will be following this for all the personal reasons we've mentioned, but also just in general. This is incredible that you're fighting this way. You are good Americans. So thank you so very much, you guys. And to my audience, call your congressperson. It's called the Congressional Review Act. That is their tool. And don't say, oh, my congressperson is a Democrat. No, call them. Don't assume anything. They need to hear from you. Guys, thank you so much. And to my audience, we'll see you next time.